Hello everyone, my name is Aakanksh Gurnani, and welcome to my YouTube channel NeuroChat with AG. On this channel, I plan to cover topics that are closest to my heart and support the neurodiverse community. Topics related to neurodiversity, autism spectrum disorder, and more. On the channel, I will interview thought leaders, esteemed researchers, scientists, professors, doctors, and psychologists, seeking their views and updates on their latest work, research, etc. I will also chat with parents of neurodiverse kids and adults and talk about experiences of neurodiverse individuals. Pasha Marlowe, they, is a Forbes-recognized neurodiversity speaker, educator, and CEO of NeuroBelonging, a coaching and consulting firm. With over 30 years of experience as a trauma-informed mental health professional, Pasha advocates for neuroinclusion and disability inclusion in organizations globally. Their work spans neurodiversity, LGBTQIA plus rights, disability, and psychological safety. As a multiply neurodivergent and queer individual, Pasha blends vulnerability and humor in her presentations, authored Creating Cultures of Neuroinclusion, and hosts the Neuroqueering podcast. Ms. Marlowe, welcome and thank you very much for the time today.
Thank you so much for having me. Yes, the Neuroqueering podcast. Thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
And to kind of jump right into it, could you please share your journey, early childhood, and experiences?
Sure. I didn't have words for it like neurodiversity or neurodivergent at the time, nor did I even know about ADHD or autism, but I was certain that my mother and father thought and learned and acted differently than a lot of my peers' parents. And so I realized over time that I too thought and learned differently from my peers. And again, I just thought that's just how our family was, but I didn't have the language for it. Later, I came to realize my father's autistic, my mother ADHD. I too am autistic and ADHD. And then I went on to have 3 children, one of which is autistic and one ADHD and the other neurotypical, but the jury is still out on that. When I was younger, as a child, I was very anxious, highly sensitive, always scared, always overstimulated. I grew up in the Baltimore, Washington area in the United States, and it's loud, it's crowded. There were many, many sounds of sirens, emergency sirens every day, and that always dysregulated me and scared me. It affected how I was able to learn in school and how I was able to play or socialize. And now I realize I'm 54 now, but I realize that this trait is still there with me. This high sensitivity to loud sounds, to lights, to sirens, and to crowds, and that has led me to move away from cities into quieter country areas. Right now, I live in the state of Maine in the United States, but I didn't identify as neurodivergent until I was 50 years old. I didn't, again, realize, even though I had been a therapist and a coach working with neurodivergent individuals and couples especially, it's interesting how sometimes those that are doctors and therapists determine their own neurodivergence and or diagnoses last. So that was certainly me. I think it came to a point where I could no longer mask. I think hormones played a part, menopause played a part, and where I was in my own work life. I think that it started to really become very clear to me. And yeah, it's funny that it took so long, but there it is, 50 years later.
So, how did you become a neurodiversity speaker and educator? I know you said you found out about yourself 50 years later, but like you mentioned, you started working in the area long before
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I think there's always this intuitive sense of people being like me and sensitive like me, or anxious like me, or easily overstimulated like me, and I was drawn to them. I was drawn to helping them and wanting to serve them. So for 32 years, I was a trauma informed, and I believe trauma is a form of neurodivergence, by the way. I was a trauma informed therapist and relationship coach. And then I started to realize that all of my clients shared many similar traits, and then started to, as the language came of neurodiversity and neurodivergence, were identifying as neurodivergent. And then I just started to specialize in it. And as for how I became a speaker and a consultant in organizations and schools, I really wanted to start to get to the root, to the source of stigma and stereotyping and pathologizing of neurodivergence. And I was able to do that one-on-one and with couples and families, but on a broader scale to have more impact, to change, hopefully, mindsets about neurodiversity. I wanted to get into the public speaking arena. So that's what I do now, as well as my coaching. I consult and speak with organizations and teach how to create cultures of neuroinclusion, including things like neuro-affirming practices and challenging the pathology paradigm and introducing strength-based work.
Your work intersects so many things: neurodiversity, disability rights, mental health, LGBTQIA+, and psychological safety. So could you please tell us more about that?
Yes, I believe intersectionality is the key to any good framework. I believe that if you are neurodiversity affirming, you also need to be disability affirming and LGBTQIA affirming. Nobody has one identity, and all these marginalized and underrepresented identities often intersect. And as we were speaking in the beginning of the call, the experience of a wealthy, white, cis, straight man in school and work and in community is very different from, let's say, a black, autistic, trans man. And there's such a difference in terms of safety, acceptance, support, resources. So I think that's a conversation that's very important when we talk about neurodiversity and neurodivergence, and how how the social positioning affects power and privilege, and how those intersecting identities impact our daily life. Also, when it comes to psychological safety, I know a lot of organizations say they're psychologically safe, or a lot of therapists or coaches say, I'm a psychologically safe person or place. And I think only when those who are most vulnerable, only those with the most intersecting, marginalized, or underrepresented identities have the safety and freedom to speak out, to express their mind, to share experiences, to offer opinions, to share failures and mistakes and feedback. Only then can a person or place even begin to be psychologically safe. So it's not something you just stamp. We did a psychological safety workshop, I'm psychologically safe now. I think there's far more to it. And I think a lot of organizations hope to be inclusive, hope to be neurodiversity affirming, hope they're psychologically safe. But when you start to talk to the neurodivergent people, or those that are most vulnerable, they don't actually feel that safety. And so I really want to get to that, again, the root and the source of that when I speak and present to organizations.
What inspired the creation of NeuroBelonging? So how do you define belonging in a neurodiverse world, and what steps can organizations take it to foster it genuinely?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about obviously diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility and belonging. Belonging's been out there for a while as a focus, but I think the experience of a neurodivergent person is a little different because we know there's going to be times where we're not accepted. We know there's still stigma. We know there's still stereotyping. We know there's still discrimination. And so when we walk into spaces that say, you belong, often what happens is we don't actually feel a sense of belonging, or we know intuitively or through experience that they don't actually mean all of your identities belong. Is it all of my mental health challenges that you're accepting? Do all of the aspects of my identity belong? And so neurobelonging came from this idea that even when the world doesn't accept us, and even though the world doesn't fully accept us or understand neurodivergent people or accommodate neurodivergent people well yet, we can still feel a sense of belonging. Like I can still stand strong in my identity, in my values, in my truth, in my worth, even when I walk into spaces that are not psychologically safe or aren't actually non-performatively, sense a place of belonging. So it's inner work. It's the inner work of feeling belonging to yourself. So no matter where I go, I belong because I'm there.
In your work with organizations, what are the common barriers to neuroinclusion, and how do you guide leaders to overcome that?
One of the main barriers is a presumed incompetence. There's a presumed incompetence with neurodivergence and disability, which is about stigma and about our conditioning as a society that has been there for a long time, which I believe is rooted in the pathology paradigm, where we are taught that different is a problem or broken or disordered or a deficit. So it's a lot about the language around it that we've been raised with and conditioned with. So when I go to organizations, I again get to that root and get to the source. And we talk about the language, like who decided what is disorder? What does disorder even mean? Who decided what is the quote unquote normal or right or ideal way to be? And why are we all following these rules and these structures and these systems that somebody created that wasn't neurodivergent and didn't probably want to fully embrace neurodivergent disabled people into the society? It was created originally in a very capitalistic, patriarchal, white, straight, hetero way. And when that is the root of a lot of the structures and systems we're working with, we need to start to dismantle them and break them down and start to talk to people about where they learned this, or possibly even say, what if everything you learned about people and disability and disorder is wrong, and really challenge the systems, even including the Diagnostic Statistics Manual, which is the manual that therapists use to diagnose people. And everything in that manual ends in disorder. And so you can come in with any difference and you could end up with a disorder. And I think that's something that needs to shift. I think we need to drop disorder from our language.
Like you just mentioned with the language, what do you think some of the most misunderstood aspects of neurodivergence in professional environments are, and how do you work to, I guess, shift those narratives?
Yeah, there's a lot of misunderstanding about language. Still, and this is 2024, a lot of people believe neurodiversity is a synonym to neurodivergence. And then still a lot of people believe neurodivergence equals autism. And so that's a very narrow scope. So that's misunderstood. So broadening the scope of what neurodivergence is far beyond ADHD, autism, dyslexia, to, again, mental health, to epilepsy, to traumatic brain injury, to trauma, and more and more. There's probably hundreds of ways to diverge from neuronormativity and hundreds of ways to be neurodivergent. And so the narrative is really still very narrow, I believe. So that's one. Also, edit that. It's very common to say neurodiverse individual, which is incorrect grammatically, but also contextually. One person cannot be diverse. So you need at least two or a group of people to be diverse. So there's still a lot of conversation out there about a neurodiverse individual, or somebody says, I am neurodiverse, or I have a neurodiverse child. And the word they're looking for is neurodivergent, because it's somebody who diverges from neuronormativity. We're all neurodiverse as a human species, right? Their neurodiversity is the diversity of all human minds. And so I think there's still a lot of misunderstanding about the language itself. And once that's cleared up, I believe we can move forward to being even more inclusive. So for example, an organization that has a neurodiversity hiring program, that's fantastic on paper. But if they really mean they're a autistic hiring program, again, wonderful for autistic people, but it's not accurate. It's not actually, neurodiversity hiring program actually would be hiring anybody, any mind, anybody. But if it was a neurodivergent hiring program, that would expand much farther than autism as well. So there needs to be more clarity, more accuracy, and just better education around the terms themselves. I think that's going to help a lot.
How do you navigate the complexity of advocating for both neurodiversity and disability inclusion in systems that often marginalize both?
Yeah, I lean into the strength-based, competency-based models. I lean into the idea that we all are different. There are many ways to function, and they're not disordered or ordered or deficient and not deficient. They're all just different. And so I talk about it from that sense of difference, but sometimes that doesn't land. It doesn't absorb. Maybe people have heard it too much. Oh, it's not a disorder, it's a difference. So then I start to talk to organizations and systems that are struggling with it about things like multiple intelligences, many ways to be intelligent, from emotional intelligence to being spatially intelligent or creative. There's many ways to be intelligent. And then I talk about the fact that divergent thinkers are nonlinear often, are often critical thinkers. We're highly adaptable and resilient people. And I think that's especially necessary now in this age of AI, which is built in, like it's linear thinking built into AI, and stigma and stereotyping actually built into AI, because it's based on everything that's already out there. It's also incorporating a lot of the stigma and stereotyping that's online as it is. So we have to really look at what is coming out of AI with a critical eye. And I think the nonlinear thinkers, the neurodivergent thinkers, are going to be assets. And so I lean into that as well when I talk to organizations.
Psychological safety is also a core theme in your work. So, how do you facilitate conversations about psychological safety? And like you mentioned earlier, a lot of people just say they're psychologically safe, but so I guess how do you kind of make sure that you are being psychologically safe and that others are being psychologically safe?
Yeah. Well, even before I bring up psychological safety, I say safety, because often in a meeting or in a yoga class or in a coaching session, you'll hear, this is a safe space. And just saying that doesn't make it true, because we don't know what everybody is coming in. People are coming in with their own unique lived experiences, with their own traumas. So when an organization says this is a safe space, everybody belongs, everybody can share, that's not necessarily true. So there needs to be a sensitivity to claiming this is a safe space, and then extending that to claiming this is a psychologically safe space. So I like to talk about intention, and talking to organizations and schools and people and families to say, I intend to be a safe person or a psychologically safe person to talk to. I intend for this to be a safe space. I can't guarantee it, and I'm curious what your experiences, what your thoughts are. Is there anything that I don't know about you or don't understand about you that you would like to express? I also talk to organizations about that idea of, we need to listen to the most vulnerable, underrepresented people, those with most intersecting marginalized identities. They're the ones who actually hold the answers to how to create psychological safety, because they're the ones who are, feeling that stigma and stereotyping and bullying and oppression. So they hold a lot of the answers. So I ask leaders of organizations, who is at the table, especially the decision table, excuse me, but also who wasn't even invited, who wasn't even considered to be invited. And often it's those people that need to be there. And it's those people who a lot of times are just left out of conversation and thought. So I keep trying to bring everyone back to the conversation and make it as inclusive as possible, which is all minds and bodies.
What long-term systemic changes do you envision in how society approaches, like, neurodiversity and disability inclusion, particularly in educational and workplace settings?
Hopefully more research, a lot more research for girls and women, for non-binary folks, for gender-conforming folks, for BIPOC folks. We need so much more research. I believe most of the statistics are wrong. The statistics that 20% of people are neurodivergent makes no kind of sense to me, considering the wide umbrella of neurodivergence, considering that half of Gen Z and a third of millennials identify as neurodivergent. And again, that's way beyond ADHD and autism and dyslexia and traumatic brain injury and epilepsy. I mean, again, on and on and on. And so if they understand the actual definition of neurodivergent and they're identifying as such, and organizations and schools and systems are not ready to talk about that or to accommodate that, I think that's a problem, and that's a direction we need to go in. Similarly, there's research and statistics saying 1 in 4 people are disabled, which also doesn't make sense because 80% of disability is non-apparent, including mental health challenges. And when you see the statistics about mental health, it's also about 80%. So now we're looking at seemingly most people being struggling now with some form of disability, being a parent or non-apparent disability. And I think that's the future of the progress in organizations, to focus on accessibility, access and support needs, inclusive design, making sure there's neuro-inclusive and disability-inclusive policies and strategies. I think we have a long way to go.
And how do you envision the future of neurodiversity and LGBTQIA plus inclusion in the mainstream culture?
Well, half of Gen Z, as I said, identifies as neurodivergent disabled. A third, at least a third, identifies LGBTQIA plus. In 2030, Gen Z is going to make up 30% of the workforce. There'll be a lot of Gen Z leaders, and this is already in their language and already in their experience. I often tell organizations, like, the future is neuroqueer, which is a word that I really love. That's a little bit it's about the intersection of neurodivergence and queerness, but it's also about diverging from heteronormativity and cisnormativity. And there's a strong correlation, I should say, between neurodivergence and LGBTQIA, especially with autism. Up to 70% of autistic people identify as not straight. And so that's a correlation that can't be ignored. And I believe the younger generations are aware of this. Like, even just they see it in their own peer groups and they see it in themselves. And as they step into leadership, I think the future of work will change and will be more inclusive and safer, I hope, and also just a lot more non-performative in their efforts.
Now I want to ask some rapid answers. These could be long answers too. But I'm just gonna ask for like I guess the definitions and however you want to explain it. Um, okay, so the first one, neurodiversity 101 definitions.
Well, neurodiversity is the diversity of all minds, and not brains, minds, because neuro doesn't mean brain. Neuro means nervous system. So it's not just about our brain, it's also about how we function and how we move and how we feel. And so I think that is misunderstood. And then I would say in terms of definitions, again, just there are no neurodiverse individuals. There are neurodivergent individuals, there are neurotypical individuals, there's people who don't identify as either, but one person cannot be diverse. Moving away from the pathology paradigm and towards the neurodiversity paradigm, where there is no one normal, right, or ideal way to be. And people need not be labeled as disordered or deficient if their functioning labels are different from society's idea of normal.
Affirming practices.
Affirming practice, affirm that people are neurodivergent by believing them. Like if somebody tells you they're neurodivergent, believe them. If somebody tells you they're disabled, believe them. And then if you can accommodate their access and support needs, listen to them. A lot of times there's this fear that, oh, if I accommodate one person, I'll have to accommodate everybody. In organizations, they worry about the cost of accommodations. And most accommodations are free or under $100. And an accommodation for one person might actually improve the work culture and productivity and problem solving and collaboration of the entire team or organization. So I say solve for one, serve many, through the use of inclusive design.
Next one, neuroqueering intersection of neurodiversity and LGBTQIA plus.
So neuroqueering is the intersection of LGBTQIA and neurodivergence, but also it's about a way of thinking, right? Because you don't have to be neurodivergent or queer to neuroqueer as a verb. So let's say when you're learning how to be neurotypical, as we all were trained and conditioned to do, when we learn the practice of being neurotypical, we are also learning and being conditioned to practice heteronormativity and cisnormativity. And what happens is when somebody realizes that they diverge from neuronormativity, say, oh, I'm neurodivergent, I finally figured this out. Typically, what happens, or commonly, I should say, is soon after or soon before, they've also started to queer or challenge or subvert or diverge from heteronormativity or cisnormativity. It is very common for people to come out within the same year neurodivergent and queer.
Okay, that's something I didn't know at all. Wow. Yeah. And is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
I think because I don't know if I said it, I definitely want to say that when we create cultures of neuroinclusion, I don't just mean in the workplace, because this has to be a systemic, collaborative responsibility that we all take on to create these cultures of neuroinclusion in workplaces, in schools, and in homes, right? And often it starts at homes. Often it starts with how we talk to ourselves and each other about ourselves, about our differences. And then it goes to, doctors and therapists when somebody's diagnosed. It's not, oh, I'm so sorry, your child is whatever, autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, what? It's not, I'm sorry. It's like, okay, this is interesting, this is different. Like, okay, how can we navigate this? So not a default to a problem, not a default to broken, not a default to something to be cured or fixed or treated. And finally, also ask the person, if you don't know how to, if you don't know how somebody identifies, if you don't know how they like to refer to themselves, first person identity first, if you don't know what their access and support needs are, don't make assumptions. Ask the person how they identify and what their access and support needs are.
Miss Marlowe, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. Um, all the things you said about neurodiversity, neuroinclusion, and disability inclusion were very enlightening and inspiring. There were so many things that I'd never heard of before, and your contributions to the field and advocating for neurodivergent and LGBTQIA plus communities really are remarkable. Um, it was a pleasure to learn from your experience and hear about your impactful work. So, thank you for sharing your valuable perspectives with us. And I look
Thank you.
forward to following your continued work in the field.
Thank you so much for having me. And thanks everyone for listening.